let me know. All right, we have a couple of questions for you. First one's from me, second one's from a viewer. And I want to know, then I'm going to elaborate on it in a minute. Do you take your hand off the collective during a hover? Do you take your hand off the collective during takeoff? Do you take your hand off the collective during landing? I'd like to know, and I'm going to give you my take on that. And then I have a viewer question that wants to know, do you or does your flight school take out the controls when you solo? So we're going to get right into that here in a minute. First, I'm going to ask you, subscribe to this channel. Do us a favor, subscribe and click that little notification bell. We're giving stuff every day until New Year's Day. So do us a favor, subscribe and click that notification bell. Hey, and if you want to earn passive income, anybody, you can be a Hogs affiliate, earn 50% off of our sales for our memberships. That link is below, hogspaysme.com. You earn 50% as long as a person stays with Hogs. Great deal, especially for broke dick instructors that don't have any money, driving a piece of shit and eating ramen noodles. And then askhogs.com is below too. Our cologne's been up now almost a year, has 14 years of my digital content in it, blogs, podcasts, videos, everything. Askhogs.com, you can go below, ask your flight and ground training questions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Santa 40, you can go below, helicopterground.com. Santa 40 is the code to get 40% off until New Year's Day on any of our memberships, private, commercial instrument, certified flight instructor, and pro pilot. So go below for those. All right, back to the handoff collective. I say, and I teach, you don't take your hand off that collective from the time you start the engine until the time you shut the engine off, or basically as long as rotor blades are spinning, you have your hand on that collective. Unless you're passing the collective over to an instructor and you're doing the proper technique, you have the controls, I have the controls, you have the controls. Or if you have to take your hand off that collective, when you're on the ground, you will make sure the collective's locked, hand forward, do what you got to do, hand back. There is one accident that's happened in the recent past where the FAA put out a notice about an instructor took their hand off the collective during a hover, door popped open, instructor takes his hand off the controls to try to lock the door, and they dropped that quickly, hit something, and rolled the helicopter over on its side. So that's one of the reasons that we say, you do not take your hand off the collective, especially in a hover. And I don't like it during takeoff, and I don't like it at landing either. Once you're at altitude and you're stabilized, take your hand off. But accidents happen because people take their hand off the collective during a hover or takeoff and landing. And the other question, do you, when you're soloing, take the controls out, or does your flight school? Had somebody ask me this question, they were really interested in this, and my answer is, I don't, and I haven't, because the first 3 to 4, maybe even 5 solos that I send somebody, I go out with them first. We go out, we get in the helicopter, take that person out, make sure they're having a good day, make sure they're feeling good and their flight training looks good. And then you say, okay, so today when I get out, I want you to do 3 takeoffs and landings, or whatever the case is you're having them do for the day. And then when they come back, I jump back in and we reposition the helicopter back up close to the hangar, because I don't want people bringing the helicopter up. So I specifically don't remove them when somebody is soloing. I do remove them, however, if somebody's going to rent the aircraft. Say you're a private pilot, you want to go take up a buddy and you're going to go fly somewhere for lunch, then yes, we remove those controls. And of course, Robinson actually states that if the person in the left seat is not a pilot, remove the controls. So I'd like to hear from you guys on those topics, what you do and don't do. And let's see. So we're going to give away a signed copy, Private Pilot 101. Do you have a question yet, Lindsay?
I do. This is coming in from LP. It is a CFI related question. He is currently working on his rating, and he wants to know, is it true that a high % of CFIs have their first student fail their check rides? And how would you avoid it?
That is a phenomenal question. And does he already have the book? Or is he just...
I can't quite remember if he was able to get the book in this past week.
Okay, answer us if you have the book or not. If you already have it, let us give it to somebody else. But if you don't have it, we'll send it to you while I answer your question. Phenomenal question. We hear that a lot. And I remember hearing that back in the beginning, that a lot of times an instructor's first student they send to a check ride does not pass. And I can tell you firsthand, my first student I ever sent did not pass. And I'll give you the reason. It was very simple. Airplane CFI, the guy was very well put together. He was, if I said study the helicopter flying handbook, he'd do it. Everything I told him to do, he did it. Gets to the check ride, and the examiner wanted to figure pressure altitude by hand, and he couldn't do it. He wanted to use his, electronic computer or whatever, and the examiner's like, no, I need you to figure out on paper, how do you do pressure altitude by hand? He couldn't do it, and he failed him. CFI add-on or CFI airplane doing helicopter private add-on, and he failed him over that. So yes, that is something that does seem to be common. There is so much to put in these check rides together that I could understand why a new CFI first student might possibly fail. And one, you asked, how can I avoid that? I can tell you, hands down, how you can avoid that. You need to have a copy of the ACS. Your student needs to have a copy of the ACS, and you need to go through this with your student, and you need to cover everything. If you don't, there's a possibility they're not going to get through. So this would be the number one way that you can make sure that your student is not going to fail, is to use the ACS, and you literally open it up and you work with it, work with your student. And yeah, it's time consuming, but do you want your student to pass on the first time or not? And if you really and truly do, going through this thing and going page to page, because when you're asking if the applicant, anything from this book, if they're not unsure of it, then they need to go find the answer, or you need to give them the ground so they have the answer. That's hands down. And the other number two, I will tell you, when I first started as a brand new CFI, 24 years ago, I met the examiner before I had my first check ride with him. And it's the same examiner I'm using 24 years later. And here was his advice. I'm a brand new CFI. The company I work for said, hey, go out and fly with the examiner, get to know each other a little bit, and just kind of, just get to know each other kind of thing, which was great, right? That was cool. And we're walking out to the helicopter, and I asked the examiner, I said, hey, I'm a brand new CFI. Have any tips for me? What could you relay to me as being a newbie? And he's like, ever heard of the practical test standards? I'm like, yes, of course. He said, make sure you're using the PTS with your students, and you go through the PTS. And then he said, and we have a real problem with people not showing up for their check rides and not having everything that they need. So I've been telling people all these years, this is now the ACS, but same as the PTS, it has practical test checklist applicant. I harp about this in videos all the time. You need to go through this with your student, and you need to do it about 3 weeks in advance. And make sure you have every single piece of information that you need is right here. If it's here, just get it. Don't say, well, what about this? What about that? No, if it's on this list, have it. Don't even argue with the point, because a lot of failures happen because somebody didn't have something they're trying to squeeze through, and the examiner may go ahead and go, but you've already started out on a bad note, right? It's all about the preparation. It's totally about the preparations. And I'll pimp this for you. Since you're going to be a new CFI, if you don't have this yet, go below and get a free PDF copy, and we'll make sure the link's down there if Lindsay didn't have it already in there for today. Top 10 check ride tips. Taz and I put this together, our 50, 60 years of experience together, and what we see, why people fail. We cover a ton of that in here. There's more than just 10. There's a bunch of bonus tips as well. The reason people fail is stupid stuff. Here's another good tip for you, and then I'll move on. Plan one day for the freaking paperwork. The endorsements, all the paperwork you got to do, 8710. Because people go, oh, 8710, it'll take that long. Well, guess what? Half the time somebody's like, maybe they're doing an add-on and they got 300 or 400 hours and they got airplane and helicopter and cross countries, and the paperwork can turn into a real mess. And starting the paperwork the night before check ride is not the thing to do. Have that paperwork done a couple days ahead of time, and try to not do much with your students the night before. I've seen it 1,000 times. If you're done a day ahead of time, and that last day can be just kind of simple and laid back, I don't even like to fly the last day before the check ride. Sometimes we do, but I prefer not to, because the students flying gets worse. Those last 2 or 3 days to the test, each day it gets worse, it gets worse, it gets worse. So don't fly too much last minute. Try to get all the flying done early, requirements done early. And here's something else we see, because we do check rides for people around the country. They tell me, oh yeah, my requirements are done. Are you sure? Yep. Did you go through the FAR aim? Yep, me and my instructor did it. We got everything. And they get here and we open up their logbook and I find, here's an example, twice on commercial pilots, their 2.0 cross country was 1.8. And I'm like, this isn't gonna work. And they're like, well, my instructor said it is. I go, yeah, well, guess what? In here it says 2.0. Make sure you go through the FAR aim with your student and treat them like they're in kindergarten, right? And I say it all the time, like we're both in kindergarten. Open the book and you go through the list. Do you have 40 in helicopters? Do you have this solo? Do you have this? Do you have this? And you gotta go down the list of that FAR aim and make sure you have every single thing completed. Because again, last minute, oh hell, it's the night before and you find out it was 1.8 when it's supposed to be 2.0. You're trying to go out and fly across country the night before the check ride. Not cool. So how can you avoid it? Go through the FAR aim with them. Make sure the requirements are true. Get on the map. Get on ForeFlight. If it's supposed to be, 25 nautical miles to the point, it's got to be more than 25, not 24 and a half. That's not going to work, right? Go through it step by step. And please, ACS, people don't want to use them. I'm telling you, instructors don't want to use them, and you're making life difficult on yourself. That was a freaking phenomenal question.
It was. Funny enough, this next question I asked you just right before we went live, and this is coming from Cameron Olson. He's currently training through Higher Ground Helicopter, and he wants to know, can you fly helicopters without a license?
The only way you can fly a helicopter without a license is when you're flying as a student and you've completed all the pre-solo requirements. You have your student pilot medical certificate. They've given you the pre-solo test. They've covered the maneuvers with you. Again, in the FAR aim, there's a list of stuff that an instructor must cover with you, and a certain amount of aeronautical knowledge you must have before you can go solo. And I had a guy once who said, I want to do all the flying and then do the ground. And I'm like, we can't do that. He's like, well, why not? It's my money. I'm paying you. And I'm like, because there's a certain amount of knowledge you have to have before you go solo. I can't legally let you go. If you're not going to sit down and do ground with me, you can never solo. And it was an aircraft dealer I even worked for, and they were like, well, you're jeopardizing the sale of this aircraft. You're not doing what the client wants. And I go, I don't give a rat's ass. I'm bound by the FAR aim and what I have to cover with him, and he's not doing ground with me. He's never going to solo. So the only way you can fly a helicopter without a license is as a student pilot with a student pilot's license and a medical certificate. What else you got?
This next one is coming from Eugene Hutchison. He's currently flying the R-22, and auto training has taught him to enter at 60 to 65 IAS. What is the recovery procedure when climbing out at 53 I'm sorry, I don't know helicopter terms. IAS, what is that?
Indicated airspeed?
Okay. So what is the recovery procedure when climbing out at 53 and say 300 feet AGL? Okay,
so is he asking, break that down for me. The first question, is there more than one question there?
No, he's just wanting to know what is the recovery procedure when climbing out at 53.
I'm not sure if he's talking about recovering or flying away from an auto rotation. To answer maybe you can elaborate more exactly what you're talking about. The auto rotation is pretty self-explanatory. Enter at 60, flare, recover. If you're climbing out, I climb out at 60. Best speed could be 53, but who can hold 53? I use 60. I like 60 for, a standard takeoff. I like 60. Works in almost every single aircraft. Keeps you above the best speed. I personally use 60. Maybe I'm just a little thick in the brain, but I'm not really 100% sure on the question. Did he type anything else? Like elaborate?
He has not.
Okay.
Caleb Shulton wants to know if
Caleb, hey.
Right?
Caleb came here and did his commercial. Caleb, what are you doing, man?
He wants to know if you're going to Rex's Rendezvous after.
Tonight? Probably not tonight, but I almost went last night. Lindsay's boyfriend was there doing karaoke last night. So probably not tonight, but probably next Saturday night. Or if you come swinging through, let's go. Let's go. We can do it. What else you got?
I believe.
Did anybody answer about the collective question? About taking their hand off during a hover?
I think.
Did anybody answer the question about if they take controls out during solos?
So I have a comment up here from Craig saying whenever you are taking your hand off, hopefully only at a cruise, always check your friction before. Correct,
yes, and depending on the aircraft you're flying, some helicopters you can friction the collective during flight. Some helicopters you can't. So make sure for the aircraft you're flying, what does the POH say? Can you use the collective friction during cruise flight? Again, some allow it, some don't. And I just want to go back to that for a second. Another reason about guarding the collective from the time the rotor blades are spinning until they're done, some helicopters, and I'll talk about Enstrom specifically, that collective, if you take your hand off of it while the blades are spinning, that collective will start to rise. And it doesn't happen as soon as you take your hand off the collective. It's like you could be on the ground doing your run up, you could be at RPM, and you take your hand off, it doesn't immediately pop up, and then it's like a delayed reaction. All of a sudden it starts to creep, and then there's like this spring-loaded action, and that thing comes popping all the way up. Trust me, it scares the ever-living hell out of you. And that's why, like on that startup in that particular helicopter, it's like there's 3 times that you check, the checklist says, check the collective lock. So you're doing something, you're checking this, collective lock, check. You know, take it off to do something, lock it, check. Like you're constantly checking that collective. And I did a video once for somebody that sent in an email and said, Kenny, would you please do a video on securing the collective, because a friend of his left a collective unlocked, got out of the helicopter to do like a hot refuel or something, and the collective raised, helicopter rolled over and killed his friend. So many bad things can happen by taking your hand off the collective. And example would be, let's say you're in a hover and you're like, I can tell you the first time it happened to me. I'm brand new pilot and I'm at a controlled airport I don't know, and I stopped because I wanted to do something there at the airport, and when I went to leave, I pulled up to a hover and I was just ready to talk to the tower. Tower says, contact ground at this frequency before takeoff. I'm like, oh, great. So I set the helicopter down, locked the collective, changed my frequency, picked back up. So things like changing radio frequencies, messing with the carb heat, all these different things why you might be tempted to take your hand off the collective during a hover, don't do it. If you are alone, you need to set the thing back down, lock the collective, do what you got to do, and then your hand back to the collective. And I'm surprised it feels like 50% of the people that have come here in the last 2 years to do final approach courses with us, they're real sloppy in the helicopter about taking their hands off the collective. And I'm like, what are you doing? What do you mean? I'm like, you're doing all this stuff with your left hand when you could keep your left hand on there, guard that cyclic with your legs, and just use your right hand and do all that stuff you're doing. And they're going, oh, well, this is how I've always done it. I'm like, well, switch. Keep your hand on that collective, use your right hand to do all this stuff. And it's just a good, solid habit to be in. Helicopters get wrecked from people getting lily-nilly, taking their hands off the collective. You shouldn't do it. You need to adjust carb heat, set it down, lock the collective, reach up, do what you got to do, reach back, unlock it, pick back up. All right, anything else?
I have a question. I personally have a question. This comment came in from LP. He said he was taught to keep the governor off, even with collective friction on, until he was ready to increase RPM prior to takeoff. Is that correct?
That is another good question. That was a good question to bring that up. Depends on where you fly. Some people use that technique where they just leave the governor off until they get ready to go. My answer is that on the Robinson, both the R-22 and R-44 helicopters that we operate, the factory checklist does not say turn the governor off and leave it off until you get ready to go. So I do it by the manufacturer's checklist. I don't turn it off. However, I understand why people use that practice. I get why you do it, because you don't want the governor to accidentally catch it at 80% when you're doing your run up and you're going up and checking your mags and the different things you're doing. So I get why people do it. And when they come here, I say, you know, if that's how you normally do it, go ahead, but that's not how I do it. That's not what the factory says to do. It's not in the factory checklist. So, you know, whenever in doubt, what's the factory tell us to do? And if you don't do something the way the factory checklist shows, I would have a pretty good valid reason why you don't do it according to the factory checklist. So, good question, and I know a lot of people do it, and I don't blame you. I understand why you do it. Personally, I don't. I follow the manufacturer's checklist, and that's how I do the startup. Governor stays on.
Okay. Next question is coming all the way from Poland. And do you
Nice.
have any tips for ILS approach in a full IMC by hand?
Wow. Okay, that's talking about an instrument approach. I haven't flown instruments, honestly, since about 2010. So I'm so far out of instrument stuff, I just don't do it. I do have an instrument rating, but we don't have any instrument training aircraft here. Everything we do is private, commercial, and CFI. So tips, go back to your original training, right? Being nice and smooth on the controls and not over controlling. But gosh, you know, normally I can come up with about anything for an answer, but I'd be bullshitting you if I sat here and started talking about instrument training when I'm not a double I and I haven't flown instruments since I left EMS. So that's what I can't help you with too much.
I have an elaboration from Eugene.
Okay.
It says, I am taking off and have an engine failure at 53 IAS and
Okay.
only have 300 feet.
Okay.
Is auto procedure the same as entering at 60 to 65?
Yeah, I would say if you've got that 53, that's enough. The procedure is going to be the same. I wouldn't try to, if you're at that low, I would just execute the auto. I would make sure you keep that 53 or even let it speed up just a little bit. I wouldn't go below 50 because in those helicopters, they say you really need it to be at least 50 for the auto rotation to come out correctly. So thanks for verifying what you were asking. I get that. Yeah, if you're at 53 and you lost the engine, I would just start looking for your spot, flare at your appropriate time, and get the thing on the ground. So yeah, okay, now I understand a little bit better. I understand what they were asking. So yeah, I would just execute the auto at 53 if that's where you're at, just continue it. I wouldn't even worry about trying to adjust the speed, because that's when you start running into problems, when you start adjusting the speed. If you go forward, you're gonna lose RPM. So if I was at 53, I would just continue at 53. I would just stay there. I wouldn't try to speed up, because that's gonna make your rotor RPM go down, and then you're monkeying with RPM. So yeah, I would just execute the auto as normal. Okay. Thanks for verifying what you were asking. I felt, it makes sense now, but in the moment I'm like, I'm not sure what he's asking.
This next one is coming in from Leon. He is in a military helicopter pilot with 800 hours total, and he's planning on going 135 as SIC, but nobody is hiring right now. Do you have any advice on going on tours or CFI start out with no SFAR requirements at his hour?
Okay, so I think, all right, so 800-hour military pilot, trying to get to the civilian world. On the correct here, you don't have your CFI. If you have 800 hours, you should be able to, if you haven't already, convert your license. And if you don't want to do the CFI route, I would start looking at trying to do tours, because some of these tour companies might be 400, 500. And if you don't want to deal with the SFAR, obviously, then you're going to need to apply for jobs where they're flying a Schweitzer or an Instrom or a Cabri or something that doesn't have the SFAR requirement. Because if, once you go to get into the SFAR, requirements, if you're going to teach, then you got to have, you know, considerable amount of time in the R22 or R44 or a combination of both. So if you don't have Robinson time, I mean, you can certainly go the Robinson route because it's the most popular civil aircraft in the world, but you're going to have to get that time under your belt to be able to be qualified to fly the R22 or R44, and then you'll have to take a commercial, or take your CFI check ride, and then you're going to have to take, it's like a short check ride that's for the SFAR 73 instructor endorsement on top of the CFI. So hopefully I'm answering your question correctly, but that's the route I would go if I was you and you're wanting to fly in the civilian world. I would try to get yourself one of those, some type of a tour job. And there again, R44 is like the most popular, being a 4-seater. So many of the tour companies are flying R44. So you can be marketable because you're not R4 Robinson pilot, because there's people that fly other things other than Robinson, but for the Robinson market, you got to have that time in the Robinson and have those proper SFAR endorsements.
Yeah, interesting enough, Caleb's on his way to Florida right now to start a tour job.
Caleb, always off in some other state, some country. That kid lives the life, man. We see your Facebook. We see you out traveling all over the globe. Man, what a lucky kid.
And he's going to push your knowledge today. He's got a twofer for you. A question.
Oh, yeah?
He wants you to refresh the low G pushover and the tendency to roll to the right because of gyroscopic precession. And then as a follow-up, is retreating blade stall not affected by the gyroscopic precession as well?
Caleb, wow, putting me to the test here. All right, so let's just run through the low G real quick. So this is why everybody's trained with the merit awareness training. You never put a large forward abrupt input in, right? If you went a large forward abrupt input, you get that weightless feeling in the aircraft where the aircraft does something like this, okay? Strain against the seat belts, rotor system becomes unloaded. However, what's still doing its job? The tail rotor. So when you put it into a low G, the tail rotor is like a big lever. It starts to make the helicopter roll to the right. So the tendency of a pilot is to take the cyclic to the left. If you do that, you're going to cause mass bumping and snap the rotor head off, and that's most likely going to be a fatal accident. So the recovery is nice, gentle aft cyclic to reload the rotor system and then correct for the roll. And if you go abrupt aft to reload the rotor system, the blade comes down and chops off the tail cone. So there is your low G in a nutshell, what goes on and why the helicopters get wrecked, and usually a fatal accident because either you're snapping off the rotor head or you're cutting off the tail boom. And then retreating blade stall, yes, at the onset of retreating blade stall, you have abnormal vibration, pitch up of the nose, and then a roll to the left. So you have the abnormal vibration and then you have a pitch up. Why? Because the blade is starting to stall over here on the retreating side. It's felt 90 degrees later in the plane of rotation, and so that's why the aircraft starts to pitch up. And then as this blade continues to stall, it then it then goes to the retreating side. So I think that answers Caleb's question. Okay. Put me on the spot trying to see if I remember.
We'll do one more question and
sure, we'll do one more question and we'll give away the CFI.
Okay. This is coming from CNC Equipment. He's been in our chat for the past couple of days.
Yep, thanks for coming back.
Can you explain insurance on private helicopters and how does it work and what does it cover?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've talked about this a lot in the past and have made several videos on insurance. Insurance dictates absolutely every single thing that we do in helicopters, whether it's what you're going to be able to do at a flight school, what you're going to be able to do as a private owner, whether you'll be insured to go fly EMS. Everything is based on insurance requirements. And then from one company to the next company, requirements change. So I can't give you a blanket statement on one particular helicopter. I can tell you that if you're going to buy like a turbine aircraft, that's usually going to take a couple hundred hours of experience before the insurance is even going to insure you. And let me try to give you another good example here on insurance. Everything is dictated by insurance, and I'll give you the best example. I had an Enstrom helicopter. I'm insuring it for $18,000 a year. I trained Chris Hauser, who is one of our online instructors and comes here and helps me fly the R22 and R44. He's our instrument instructor. I've trained Chris, private commercial CFI. I go to put him on the insurance and they go, oh, sorry, have him go get 350 hours in make and model. And I freaking blew up. I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, we want him to have 350 hours. I said, that's effing ridiculous. I've just trained this guy in my aircraft with my operation at my home base. I need him as an instructor, and you're telling me to have him go off and get 350 hours. And they're like, yeah, that's it, that's the reg. So I blow up over the whole incident. I find another insurance company through another operator. He said, call my guy. And I called him up and he's like, Kenny, you're the expert. We're not gonna tell you who you can and can't hire. Wrote me a policy for 10 grand a year and I could do anything I wanted, and I'm still using the same guy 12 years later. So with what I do here, I have the benefit of I can hire who I want. I have an open pilot warranty. I don't even have to put him on the insurance. If I qualify somebody and say he's qualified to fly to rent, work for me, solo, I can do that because they're taking my time and experience in the industry to make good decisions on what I do with the aircraft. But a lot of companies are regulated, oh, you got to have 25 hours before you can solo or 30 hours before you can solo. So insurance for a private owner, you're gonna need to shop around. And if you get serious about that, if that's something you're looking at, I can tell you who I insure with. It's Dave Monaco, Southwest Aviation Insurance, one of the best in the business. And he's been doing it for 40 years and flies his own MD-500 to work from his house to his office. But you gotta shop around, and again, I can't. Insurance is insurance, and it just depends on each individual company, what they'll allow, how many hours they want you to have. Yeah, that's really the best I can tell you. I'd love to tell you more, but that's the bottom line. Is it depends on every individual insurance company and on your time in the aircraft. All right, so we're going to give away, and we can answer a few more questions after this if you want, but we're going to give away a 12-month CFI membership right now. And I'm going to ask a very simple question. And the question is, how long must a instructor keep student records on file? Very simple question. It's a very simple answer. So the first one to answer in chat, and while Lindsay's waiting over there, we claim the winner by our chat. And I can tell you for a fact, your chat may read differently, and people argue in the comments all the time. Oh, well, I was first. Well, we have to go by our chat. And again, we know now from experience, different device, different in the place of the country, chats don't always show the same on anybody's device. So we got to go by what our chat shows on the computer that Lindsay is operating right now.
Yes.
Got a winner?
Yes, LP. He was the first to win.
LP, all right, you got it. So
3 years, yep.
3 years is correct. You must keep flight instructor records for 3 years. So reach out to Heather at helicopterground.com. That's her email, Heather at helicopterground.com. And she will set you up with the 1 year CFI membership. All right, we got to pay the bills. We can answer some more questions. I'll recap. Well, if you type in another question or two, if you want us to answer something else, we got to tell you, Santa 40 between now and New Year's Day. That's 40% off private pilot monthly, private pilot yearly. Same thing for commercial, CFI and instrument, 40% off any of those courses. And that 40% lasts as long as you keep it. So if you keep it for 1 month, 6 months, 8 months, you keep the 40% off. And for members that are watching, can I unsubscribe and sign back up with the discount? Yes, absolutely you can. You can unsubscribe from the system, and then you can sign back up with the 40% discount, but you got to do it before New Year's Day. Again, subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you're notified of the other videos we're going to come out with each day. We're going to do live. We'll be live each day to do a giveaway. Subscribe and click the bell. Remember, Private Pilot 101 is down below. You can get a free PDF of that, along with what we mentioned earlier. Top 10 tech ride tips. And this is more just tips for actually taking the practical test. Private Pilot 101 is all kinds of stuff. It's everything I could think of in one book about training, helicopters, scheduling, ground school, everything I can think of that can help you get through a private is in that fancy book right there. And then don't forget, hogspaysme.com. That link is down below. Affiliates. So our professional pilot sells for $2,800. We have several people, instructors, that had somebody sign up for Pro Pilot through their affiliate link, and that person, after the 30 days passed for the refund policy, they got $1,400 zapped to their PayPal account. So you have to have PayPal to use this affiliate system, but you'll be able to see how many of your students are signing up. And if you're a broke instructor driving a POS, hopefully you're not flying a POS, but driving a POS, and you're buying, animal crackers in bulk because you don't have enough money to get through the week to eat, this is a pretty good way to put some money in your pocket and help you survive. All right, well, I'm going to start wrapping it up. Yesterday, Lindsay, I cut it off, didn't realize there was a couple questions left. I'm getting ready to wrap it up. Anything else, Lindsay?
I do not see any more. Well, actually, Dave Pax just came in thinking about buying an R44. What is the advantage cost-wise of buying new versus used? And is there a way to determine which is the most cost-effective based on timing out of parts?
Ooh, man, that's a good question. Well, I would, if you can afford it, I'd just buy brand new. I mean, I know might be out of reach for some people, but I think in the end, you always have to look at how much time's left on the aircraft, right? So either you spend big bucks brand new, or you buy one that's halfway timed out or a quarter of the way timed out, but you're going to have that certain amount of time before the aircraft has to go back to the factory to be rebuilt, and it's going to cost you, I can't tell you the exact cost. I don't own, I actually do a lease, and I lease for that reason, that I can use the aircraft for as long as I need it, and when I'm done, all I got to do is return it. There's a lot to buying an aircraft. R44 is one of my favorites, and I think it's an absolutely a good choice. But as far as the money, it's hands down expensive no matter how you slice it. And I talk often about a guy named Roger Sharkey out on New Hampshire, and the guy's been in business for over 50 years, and he sells helicopters and has for years. He doesn't do Robinsons, but he does Bells and Enstроms. And I'm not saying this to be a smart ass. This is coming from a guy who's been doing it forever. He's like, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. And if you're going to complain about how much it costs after the fact, then don't do it. And it sounds kind of crude, right? It sounds kind of rough, but the longer you're around these, you really figure out that if you're trying to go the cheap route, you're trying to spend the least amount of money, you're going to end up disappointed in the end, because all of them across the board are expensive. And whether you buy it brand new or you buy it with 1,000 hours left, the maintenance is still high. You still got to do your annuals and your 100 hours. You still got to do the oil changes. You're still going to have occasional breakdowns. The insurance, like for R44 is $26,000 a year just for the insurance policy. So no matter how you slice it, it's going to be a lot of money. And as far as telling you at which one, at what point along the way would be the best as far as hours, I've never dug into that. A lot of people dig into that math and really kind of know how to play that game, but I've never dug that far into it. I've owned an Enstrom, and I personally will probably never own an aircraft again, just because of, if the factory says it's going to cost you $250 an hour, it's going to cost you $500 an hour. That's just the way it is. They break, things go wrong with them, things get damaged, you have overspeeds, they get wrecked. There's all kinds of bad reasons. How do I want to rephrase that? Ownership is expensive, and you got to have, we'll say, disposable cash, right? You got to have that money in the bank to be ready at any time something happens, and you have a bad cylinder. Boom, 10 grand. Or engine or a rod goes through the side of the block. Oh wow, engine, 40 grand. Whatever the case is, they're super expensive, hands down. I don't recommend buying them unless you got money to actually burn. I hate to say it that way, but that's how I feel about it. Like I said, I'll never own again. I'll lease as I do now, but that's it. I wouldn't buy one. All right, is that it?
Looks like it.
All right, come on. What are we giving away tomorrow?
We are giving away tomorrow a Hogs hoodie.
2XL hoodie.
Yes.
We've got one of these left, I think, 2XL, and then we have a Live to Fly Another Day that's 2XL. So it's either one of those that we're gonna give away tomorrow, and another book, and then who knows what we might come up with between now and then. All right, subscribe, click the notification bell. Leave us a comment down below if it's the end and you didn't get in chat in time, and we'll see you next video. Peace out.
Peace out.
You feel the pressure to fly, but know the right decision is to stay on the ground. Hit the hogs, no go, and live to fly another day. Helicopterground.com